It's primary season in Illinois. This year, Congressional District 13 has a new shape. It starts west in East St. Louis, winds northeast through the capital of Springfield, on to Decatur, and ends in Champaign. Across from the Mississippi River and famous Gateway Arch sit East St. Louis, where churchgoers demand politicians keep their promises.
If you decided that you were going to bring development here, don't just talk about it, be about it.
While in Champaign, University of Illinois students are concerned about the Supreme Court overturning legalized abortion in the U.S.
I think if we could focus on just making, obviously, healthcare more accessible and safer for everybody, it would be good.
Two Democratic newcomers want to represent Central Illinois in Congress. Nikki Budzinski, a Peoria native who's worked directly with Governor Pritzker and President Biden. And David Palmer, a former basketball player and businessman who calls Champaign home. Illinois Public Media, WAND News, and the League of Women Voters of Champaign County present a debate with the Democratic candidates of Illinois Congressional District 13.
Good evening. I'm Tanisha Spain of Illinois Public Media. Thank you for tuning in for what we hope will be a vigorous discussion of issues important to Central Illinoisans. In a moment, you're going to hear from the candidates, Nikki Budzinski and David Palmer. But first, the format for tonight's debate. Each candidate has a minute and a half to answer the question. The opposing candidate then has 30 seconds to respond. Then there's another 30 seconds for follow-up. After that, we'll move on to the next question. Both campaigns have agreed to this format ahead of time. There will be a minute-long closing statement from each candidate at the end. The League of Women Voters of Champaign County is timing this debate. Neither campaign has seen tonight's questions. Joining me tonight asking these questions is Doug Wolf from WAND. Welcome and thanks for coming. And also Hannah Meisel, our reporter from NPR Illinois. And let's get started. Question one. Earlier this week, an 18-year-old gunman shot and killed 19 children and 2 teachers in Texas at an elementary school. On May 14th, an avowed white supremacist drove across the state of New York to shoot and kill 10 black people at a grocery store. David, we're going to start with you. We've heard both sides of the aisle talk about how change is needed, but what real plans do you have for gun reform in this country?
So first and foremost, obviously, we want to thank WAND and I will for putting this on. Obviously, the League of Women Voters for participating and doing the timing tonight. But back to your question, I think the most important thing we have to do is, shed the partisanship of this and just think about this from the perspective of, people as parents, concerned citizens in this country. We know that, access to guns is too readily available for people who have mental health problems. We need to strengthen our background checks. We need to make sure that, people who are having troubles aren't getting their guns and using them as, what they think are solutions. In this state, we have really good gun laws. I'm a Ford card holder. I'm a gun owner. I believe in responsible gun ownership. But that's just not the case in a lot of places. And when you look at cities like Chicago that are being flooded with guns from places like Gary, Indiana, you look at, East St. Louis, there's plenty of guns coming across the border there from the Missouri border. We have to really make sure that we have, universal background checks, that we have federal legislation so we can have uniformity with our gun laws so those things can't happen, and that we can really make sure that the people in this state, where we do have good gun laws, can feel safe and feel protected.
Nikki, you have 30 seconds to respond to that.
Let me just say first, thank you for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. But my heart does break for the families of those that lost their children just this week, and then at Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York. We have to do something about gun violence. I agree with David that I think we need to pass universal background checks. That's something that the House of Representatives has done consistently and the Senate has stopped. But I think we need to go further and support red flag laws to support our law enforcement officers and making sure that those that shouldn't have weapons, law enforcement has an ability to stop someone that might have a weapon. I also think it's really important that we stop paying lip service to mental health in this country. It's critically important that we be investing in that. Okay. That's very important as we're addressing gun violence.
I'm going to have to stop you there. David, we're going to go to you for a 30-second rebuttal.
You know, I think this is an issue that transcends politics, and I do agree with Nikki on this one. We got to stop the lip service. I think it's time for us to come together as Americans, you know, force these gun lobbies to bend to our will and not us bend to theirs. I think we have to come together. We have to make sure that we protect our most vulnerable, and that's our kids. You know, we shouldn't live in a country where the #1 cause for children to die being gun violence. And so we've got to make a real change.
Okay. Next question is for Nikki. A few years ago, East St. Louis had one of the highest murder rates in the country for a city its size. Here in Champaign, a record 17 people were murdered last year. What can Congress do to support cities facing increased gun violence?
Well, I want to start out by first saying I applaud what the city of Champaign has done, which is using their American Rescue Plan funds, something that was provided and signed under President Biden, to invest in real gun violence prevention programs. We need to have a federal partner. Local governments need a federal partner in addressing gun violence in this country and throughout central and southwestern Illinois. But it also starts with creating not just taking on the illegal guns that are coming in, creating common sense gun measures, but it's also about investing in our communities again. And it's about creating economic opportunity. When I look at East St. Louis and their #1 employer is the Casino Queen, I think East St. Louis can be doing a lot better. We need to be investing in economic development as a tool to helping us address gun violence in this district. And that's something that I would be very much committed to bringing people together on to address in East St. Louis, Decatur, and Urbana-Champaign.
Okay, excellent. All right. David, you've got 30 seconds to respond to that.
Yeah, so I think when you talk about gun violence in places like East St. Louis and Champaign, we know that it's usually an economic problem, right? Low-income areas, you know, there's lots of crime and poverty, and so I think the way to address that is, first we have to look at what are the economic solutions that work. I think one of the ways that we can start to study the solution is things like HR 40. These are predominantly black areas, and I think when we study what that could look like to reinvest in these areas in a much, you know, stronger way, I think then we can start to find equity there. And I think when you have equity, sorry about that, gun violence starts to go down.
Okay. All right, Nikki, you've got 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I think one of the things that we really need to be focusing on, I agree, on economic development. And one of the things I was really proud when I worked in President Biden's administration and the Office of Management and Budget is I helped to set up the Made in America office. We need to start creating economic opportunities, more economic opportunities in central and southern Illinois. And what that means is creating good paying jobs, American jobs, investing in American manufacturing. I was just visiting with a company in Decatur, TCCI, wanting to build electric parts here for EV vehicles. We should be finding ways to create more opportunity, and I'd like to be a federal partner to local governments to make that possible.
All right, thank you very much. Doug, you've got the next question.
Thank you. David, this is for you. Mitch McConnell blocked President Obama from appointing a justice in his final year in office. Donald Trump was able to appoint a justice late in his term. Should there be a change in the Constitution to force the United States Senate to hold hearings on new justices anytime a court opening takes place?
Yes. I think that when, you know, Senate majority or minority leaders, when you hold the American people hostage, I think that you're not doing your job. I think when people elect a duly elected president, I think that the country has spoken, and I think that he's entitled to certain rights and responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities, because that's exactly what it is appointing competent and capable Supreme Court justices, because we know that the Supreme Court is one of the most important institutions that we could ever have in this country. You know, when you think about what's going on now with potentially Roe v. Wade being overturned, I mean, we have to think about what's at stake when we let these kind of things happen. You know, women deserve the right to have autonomy over their body. And I think when we have people who hijack, you know, Supreme Court appointments, I think you put people in danger. And so I think that we have to make sure that we have an equitable, fair and just way for presidents to do the things that they're responsible for. And I think that is something that we should create legislatively for sitting presidents.
All right, Nikki, you've got 30 seconds to respond.
I think the president should have the right to put forward nominees, not just judicial nominees, but at all levels of federal government, when he is elected duly, as President Biden was, to put forward nominees. And I think that the Senate Republicans have been obstructionists on a variety of different nominations that President Obama had put forward, as you mentioned, Doug, but also as President Biden has put forward. The Supreme Court is the best example. I have to say, as a woman, I was shocked to read the draft opinion on Roe versus Wade, and really it sets in with you what it means to have a Supreme Court that is representative of certainly my values, which is that a woman should have her own right to make her own reproductive health decisions.
I think stop you there, Nikki.
Yes,
sorry.
Thank you. Sorry,
David. You've got 30 seconds.
No, I mean, I think we're in agreement here. I think going forward, you know, it's important for duly elected presidents to be able to put their staff in place. And these, you know, senatorial nominations are a huge part of that. And I think we should carve out a law that at least allows that. I think that minority parties shouldn't be able to block that. And so we have to make sure that, you know, we do carve that out and don't just hope that people act in the correct manner.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Question number 4 goes to Hannah.
As you both just mentioned, a draft opinion leaked earlier this month suggests the U.S. Supreme Court is poised to overturn its decision in Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion in 1973. Nikki, what should a democratically controlled Congress do in response to that decision in the next 6 months, while Democrats still have that control? You know, with the context, of course, that an effort to codify Roe into federal law recently failed in the Senate.
Yes, I think this is an incredibly important issue. Obviously, in this election, there's a lot at stake for women. As you pointed out, Hannah, that the draft decision, if that actually becomes the law of the land, Roe v. Wade, which we've considered to be settled law for decades, is going to be overturned. And I do just want to point out the 13th District butts up against Missouri, which is one of the states, the 26 states that has a trigger law that would immediately reverse Roe v. Wade. And so the state of Illinois is a safe haven state for women that are able to make their own reproductive health care decisions, is going to see a flood of women coming into the district, coming into the entire state, looking for access to health care. I want to be their champion in Congress. I'm very proud to be the candidate in the Democratic primary that has Planned Parenthood and NARAL support. I have been throughout my life a very strong pro-choice advocate, and it will be my job when I'm elected to Congress to fight for women and to make sure that if they didn't codify Roe before, I'm going to keep working toward that, because I think this issue is too fundamental to women's rights, and reproductive health care shouldn't be something that's negotiated.
David, you've got 30 seconds to respond.
No, so I think we're going down the right path. Roe v. Wade is settled law. There, you know, we don't have to debate about that. Women deserve body autonomy. You know, I have a small daughter at home, and I think about what it's like trying to tell her something now, and she's 1, right? Very difficult. And so I think that we really have to make sure that, you know, I know that codifying Roe v. Wade failed in the Senate, but I think we just have to keep reintroducing it. I think it's something that's critically important to our country. And, you know, when we stop fighting for women, it's no point.
All right, Nikki, you've got 30 seconds.
I would just say that in the 13th District, Fairview Heights has a Planned Parenthood clinic, and Granite City is Hope Clinic, and both of them provide critical access to reproductive health care for women. In Planned Parenthood has said to me that they've already seen a 121% increase in women crossing state lines looking for reproductive health care. That's only going to increase, and that's why it's so important that we codify Roe at the federal level, and I'll be fighting for that in Congress.
Okay, next question goes to Doug.
David, the shortage of infant formula has been in the news recently. Right now, there is a 17.5% tariff on the import of formula from Canada to protect the U.S. dairy industry. Should that tariff be lifted or reduced?
I think in times of crisis, we have to lift the tariff. I understand maybe concerns about, you know, protecting the price of milk, but this is a crisis, and this is our most, you know, vulnerable population. our infants, not just toddlers or kids. These are infants, and so we have to do anything that we can to make sure that we make sure that people have access to a formula, because they have to feed their kids. You know, my kids are 4 and 1. I'm not far removed from having to go to the store and buy formula, right? Formula, you know, it's very expensive already, and so it's just a burden that is undue on parents. And I think that anything that, you know, that we can do in Congress, that we can do on a local level to help mitigate that, is going to be very, very important for working class families, because that's who's hurt here. Working class families, you know, people who are already having a tough time making ends meet. You know, you're going out, it's already expensive for you to find this formula. It's $30 a can sometimes now, and then you go out and you can't find it. I just couldn't imagine as a parent what I would do. And so that, yeah, I would absolutely cancel the tariff immediately if I was in Congress, and I would advocate for it with all of my colleagues there.
All right, Nikki, your response to that?
I think that parents are scared right now because there isn't access to baby formula, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that those concerns are relieved and baby formula is accessible to parents and their children. That's critical. If that means a temporary suspension of a tariff in order to get parents what they need to provide for their children, I would of course support that. But I do want to say, overall, I think what COVID and what inflation, which I do think is the most important issue of this campaign, and the pressures around the supply chain and our trade agreements is a larger issue that we do need to be looking at. I very much support the idea of, again, making things here, looking at how we're doing trade agreements so that we're not so overly reliant on a global economy, that we're creating jobs here again, which I do think is very important.
All right, David, your rebuttal.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things about this conversation that we can't leave out that's critically important is that we have to also look at our antitrust laws. I think when companies like Abbott, they're so large, they have such a huge market share, they need to make sure that you're either going to be responsible when you have such a large market share, or we're going to have to go in and you know, break these kind of companies up, because this kind of stuff can't happen, and working families can't go without being having access to feed their children.
Excellent. Okay. Nikki, this next question is for you. It's about agriculture, and it's a video question that was sent in from a viewer.
Yes, this is Todd Henricks from Cerro Gordo, Illinois. My question is about the 13th Congressional District being primarily an agricultural district. How are we going to handle harvest this fall for our farmers with our fuel prices continuing to skyrocket? That's going to be devastating on the farmers when they go to the fields to harvest crops this fall. And also, the rising fuel prices are very detrimental to the input costs for our 2023 crop. How are we going to change and make this more equitable for our farmers?
All right, Nikki, your response?
I completely agree. I realized I had an opportunity to meet with the Macoupin County Farm Bureau, the Champaign County Farm Bureau, and I heard firsthand the rising costs of fertilizer, the rising costs of input. I also heard a lot about the strain on the supply chain, that family farmers aren't getting the equipment that they need to farm the land that they have. That also is something that we need to be addressing. I think there are things in Congress. One, I would say we need to find immediate relief in inflation. One of the things that I very much support is a year-round E15 blend, which I think does a couple of things. I think, one, it provides relief at the gas pump, but I also think it provides support to our family farmers in ethanol. As you probably know, Illinois is the #2 producer of corn, the #1 producer of soybean. By supporting a year-round E15 ethanol blend, we're supporting our family farmers and helping to reduce some of those costs. But I also think we need to be supporting sustainable farming, and that means supporting voluntary cover crop programs. How are we working at the federal level with family farmers on what they need? And I think that's another example. Third, I think one of the things that I'm really proud, I very much support, is the bipartisan infrastructure deal. We need to help family farmers during this very difficult time get their goods to market. And what you saw in President Biden's infrastructure package was an investment in roads and bridges, ways that family farmers are going to be able to get their crop to market, and that's incredibly important as well. So we need to be reducing costs, finding opportunities to do that, but being a partner to family farmers.
All right, David, you've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, so, being someone who worked, for the Illinois Farm Bureau a time ago and just being able to really connect with farmers and have conversations with them, these are problems, right? They do have lots of problems with their margins because we've had poor infrastructure. They have, bad roads, bad bridges, bad locks and dams. It costs a lot of money to move their product. And so we do have to do things that make them feel more equitable. I think things like, the gas tax holiday, which is something that's going to be important here. And then we also have to make sure that we work on trade tariffs because we're having a real problem there.
I'm going to have to stop you there, David. 30 seconds, Nikki.
I would just say in this district, there's a long history of the congressperson representing it serving on the Agriculture Committee. And I would be, when I'm elected, very interested in serving on the Agriculture Committee. Next year, there's going to be a very important farm bill negotiated. And I would want to be a partner to family farmers in Congress to make sure that they get what they need in that bill.
Okay, excellent. All right, Hannah, you've got the next question.
A Politico and Morning Consult poll conducted earlier this month found 40% of Americans believe the Biden administration's politics are, quote, very responsible for inflation's nearly 4-decade high. David, have the president and Democrats in Congress exercised enough interventions to slow inflation? And what more should be done to help families cope with the strain on their budgets?
So inflation is something that I feel too, right? You go to the grocery store, you're seeing about a 10% increase in costs there. We're just talking about the gas pump. You're seeing a big increase there. I think that the administration has to be a little bit more, we have to be active and we have to be engaged. And I think that we have to be doing everything that we can to make sure that we're trying to help working families. And I think that we've, left a few things on the table. I think we have to be more aggressive in getting rid of these trade tariffs. I think they are really increasing the cost of goods, and that cost is usually just passed right on to consumers, right? And so we've got to really work on that. And I think that we also have to make sure that, as we're negotiating, it's just not always about, politics and the next election cycle. This is about people's lives and people's families. And, these are really hard times. And so as someone who does feel the pain of inflation, who does have to worry about, the cost of childcare, going to the grocery store every day and just trying to make those ends meet. I think that we need the administration to be a little bit more aggressive in their legislation to really make sure that working families have a lot of relief.
All right, Nikki, you've got 30 seconds.
Let me just say very clearly, we need to be doing more. We need to be doing more to support working families and the pain that they're feeling at the pump and in the grocery store. I actually applaud what the state of Illinois did recently in their budget, finding some short-term release at the gas pump with the gas tax and also with sales tax at grocery stores and some relief with property taxes. I think that's what people need right now. And I think that in Congress, that is definitely something I would be fighting for and what I would be advocating that the administration provide more immediate relief on. But I think that this is a problem that has been building for a long time. I talked about the supply chain. I think this is, again, something that I'm very committed to. How are we going to be, again, less reliant on a global economy that is bottlenecking our supply chain and creating and exacerbating more of our inflation problems? There's a long-term and a short-term solution. Thank you.
David, last 30.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would say that's interesting here is that we've had really bad trade policies in the past that have us in this situation here. I think when you look at things like, NAFTA with the Clintons, it put us in a bad situation where we don't produce a lot of goods and services here. And I think Nikki's right. We do need to make more goods and services here. And it's something that we have to start doing more, and we have to be aggressive about it.
Okay, excellent. Next question goes to Doug.
Nikki, this one's for you. As of this week, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has resulted in 4,000 Ukrainian deaths and 14 million evacuations. The United States has been providing funding to Ukraine in its war against Russia. Should there be a limit to the amount of money that the United States commits to the war, or should there simply be an open checkbook to the Ukrainians for the amount of money we spend?
Well, I don't think there should be an open checkbook, but I do think we absolutely have to be standing with the Ukrainian people, and I think that's the action that you recently saw Congress take and the president take to stand by the Ukrainian people. I think there is too much at stake in this world to not specifically stand up to Putin He is a thug. He is someone who unprovoked came into a country, a democratic country, and invaded it. And I think that the president has done a good job of bringing together NATO allies to stand with us. This isn't just us alone. We're standing with our allies internationally, standing up to Putin and standing with the Ukrainian people. It's been very inspiring to see how the Ukrainian people have fought back. And I think it's been very critically important that we've provided aid to them in that moment, because we just can't allow Putin to win.
David, you've got 30 seconds.
I think I do champion the sentiment as well that we do have to stand up to Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime. But I think that we're spending too much money. I think that we have too many, crisis level things going on right now in our country to be, I think sent to the tune of $64 billion at this point to Ukraine. These are the things, this money can be used in America. I heard the lady on the intro talk about if you go to be this congressperson and you're going to talk about what you're going to do for East St. Louis, bring jobs and infrastructure here. And I think that we can use that money for that, to invest in this district.
All right, Nikki, your thoughts.
I would just go back to, though, I think the number one issue in this campaign is fighting inflation. I think when I'm touring the district and I'm asking people what they care the most about, it's finding relief at the gas pump and in their everyday lives. And that's what I want to be focused on in Congress. I think there are things that we should be fighting for that the state of Illinois has led on that would provide immediate relief to working people. Those are the issues that I mostly hear about, and those are the things that I really want to tackle in Congress.
Excellent. Okay. Folks, that was the first half. We've made it to the first half of the debate here. So in the next half hour, we're going to talk to our Democratic candidates of the 13th Congressional District about racial justice. We're going to talk about voting rights and even climate change, and we're going to take more of your questions as well. So stay with us, and we're going to be right back after this.
Every day is a blessing. He hit the window twice with the gun. I just punched it. I heard a gunshot. I'm thinking, I gotta survive.
Science is the rigorous pursuit of knowledge.
There's a deeper mystery here.
We've been asking for millennia, what is life? What is consciousness?
दलित औरतों का पत्रकार के रूप में कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता। हम एक आईना भी थे और बने रहेंगे।
The kids who come here are competing in a world that is very high achieving.
And it's tangible in some of those classes. You can feel how worried people are about college.
I'm still out there searching, looking for myself, I guess. We'll see where that takes me.
This summer,
it's coming. You're passionate about flavor and you respect your heritage.
Delicious.
No one imagined a fall as graphic as the fall of the Boleyn family.
Thank you, Pacific Ocean. That's my boo right there.
Everything you love this summer on PBS and the PBS app.
Welcome back from the studios of Illinois Public Media on the campus of the University of Illinois. Welcome back to the 13th Congressional District Democratic primary debate. That's a lot. Good evening. I'm Tanisha Spain of Illinois Public Media. I'm joined by Doug Wolf from WAND. Welcome.
Good to see you.
And Hannah Meisel from NPR Illinois. You guys hanging in?
I'm in.
You got another 30 minutes? What about candidates? You guys got another 30 minutes in you? All right, here we go. So tonight we're talking with Nikki Budzinski and David Palmer, two Democratic newcomers hoping to represent the newly drawn 13th Congressional District. And we're going to jump right back in with those questions. First question for this top of the hour is for Nikki. An Associated Press and NORC poll taken this month says 1 in 3 American adults believe that native-born Americans are being replaced by immigrants for electoral gains. If elected, how would you deal with members of Congress pushing this narrative and other conspiracy theories?
I think that democracy and the future of what's at stake for this country is critically important, and we saw that obviously on January 6th. When there were insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol, all to overturn an election for the power of one man. I think we can see from that democracy itself is very much at stake in this election. There's a lot at stake. I think voting rights is something that we need to be really focused on. I think that's critically important. I think we need to pass, and I would sponsor in Congress, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to be making sure that everyone's vote counts. In the state of Illinois, we're very lucky to have great voting rights laws. We have same-day registration, we have vote by mail, but we need to make sure that in other states, and that's why I support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, is to make sure that everyone's vote is counted. I think that another thing with all of the conspiracy theories that I think people, what I hear when I'm campaigning throughout the 13th District is people want more civility. They want someone that's going to go to Congress to be a part of the solution and not the problem. And that's something I very much believe and something that I would be committed to in Congress and is something I've really committed my entire career to, even on very difficult issues. I think we need to bring people together, Republicans and Democrats, to get things done. And that's what I've done in my career, and that's what I do when I'm elected to Congress.
All right, David, your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with, bridge building politics. I think that's the way that you can really, make inroads across the aisle. But I think when we talk about things like replacement theory, I think they're dangerous. I think they're nonsense, and I think that we need to call them out immediately. I think that when you have, situations like what goes on in Buffalo at the top supermarket, when there's, a young kid who thinks that he is being replaced and that, there's some conspiracy to get rid of him in this country. That stuff is dangerous and it costs us American lives, and we have got to call it out immediately.
All right, Nikki, your rebuttal.
I 100% agree. What we saw with the hate speech in Buffalo, this was a white supremacist that went into a predominantly African-American area in Buffalo. And this was someone that had posted online. I think that we need to be cracking down, and there needs to be oversight in that kind of language and that kind of rhetoric, which is really, again, I think, escalating things to what I mentioned with January 6th, this complete lack of civility that there is in this country. We need to really be rebuilding that.
Okay, Hannah, goes to you.
There's been a measurable rise in racist hate speech and hate crimes in the U.S. over the past decade, and increasingly during COVID and very recently. David, what do you believe is driving that proliferation of white supremacist ideology? And do you believe that there is a policy answer to it? Examples might include repealing the federal law that shields online platforms from liability for what their users post on it, or an education sort of intervention?
So obviously, I think we need an education intervention on those kind of things, but I also think too that we just can't get caught up in that. I think that it's not a real thing. I think that when we have people who spout that kind of language and do those kind of things, I think we just I don't know. Could you ask that second part of the question again about?
Well, is there a policy answer to this? We live our lives online.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a policy answer? Is it repealing Section 230, or is it, giving, if we're gonna not regulate that on the front end, is it, giving law enforcement more access, more ability to tamp down on those things, although that might pose some First Amendment issues?
Yeah, I don't think that is more surveillance, but I think that we just have to make sure that when we do see that kind of rhetoric online, that we call it out, that we, do whatever we can to flag those kind of people and make sure that we watch that, because I think when we see these incidents of mass casualties and such carnage, we know where they start at. They start online, on places that allow what's so-called free speech, but a lot of times it's just hate speech. It's people who want to say terrible things about other people, and they use the guise of the First Amendment. And we have got to get rid of that because it's costing us lives and the lives of children, and it's dangerous.
Nikki, you've got 30 seconds to respond.
I think first, I think it is important to state this, that I support the First Amendment. I think people do have a right to free speech. But I do think that when it comes to conspiracy theories, hate speech, certainly we saw this during the pandemic, misinformation that is promoted and fast-tracked all throughout social media. I agree with Congress having oversight and bringing in some of these larger social media companies to hold them accountable for the information that is out there. But I do think it's important that we also say, and I believe this, the First Amendment is also very important and needs to be protected too.
David, you've got 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. First Amendment is key. I think that it makes us kind of who we are in this country, the right to have, your opinion on issues. But I just go back to when we're losing lives because of nonsense and hate speech. I don't know what the exact remedy for it is, but I know that we have to come together and we have to start to have conversations across the aisle, because if we don't, things like what happened in Texas and what happened in Irvine and what happened in Buffalo will continue to happen, and we'll continue to only offer thoughts and prayers.
Okay. All right, Doug, you've got the next question.
Nikki, you touched on this briefly already. Several states have passed legislation severely restricting voting rights. Nikki, what type of federal legislation would you propose, if any, to expand the ability of voters to go to the polls in all states?
So I mentioned this, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is something I would sponsor, but it's not just something that I want to say I sponsor. It's something we have to prioritize as a country. And it's something that in Congress I really want to help lead on. I think it's incredibly important that we make sure in states, in southern states and other Midwestern states that are not far from Illinois, where people's rights to vote are being diminished, where they're taking away early vote days, where they don't have access to vote by mail, where it becomes increasingly more difficult for people, and specifically working people, people that are juggling multiple jobs to try to get to the polls. Disenfranchising people and their ability to vote is something that in Congress I would be very committed to leading on, and I think the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is the best example of something that we can be doing to help support other states that don't have the same rights that we have as Illinoisans.
All right, David, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I think that, if you don't have access to the polls, we don't have, access to representation. But I also think that we need things like serious campaign finance reform. I think that, I've agreed with Nikki on a bunch of things here. But I think, like in this situation, this is a newly drawn congressional district. And I think that it is key that we have someone who's been here, lived in this community, represent us in Congress. And so I think when you pair with the Voting Rights Act with campaign finance reform, I think we can have a chance to have, populations like this be able to represent ourselves in Congress.
Okay, Nikki?
I'm really proud to be endorsed by a group called the End Citizens United, which they really lead on two things. One is, how do we get money out of politics? And I think that means overturning Citizens United. I think Citizens United brought in a flood of money that costs to run, and it should be, if anyone wants to run for office, you shouldn't have to raise millions and millions of dollars if you want to step forward and be in public service, and that's the reality of it right now.
Okay, all right, Hannah.
Next question is for David. The 2021 Illinois Climate Assessment warns that if we don't begin curbing greenhouse emissions extremely soon, Illinois could see a 150% increase in rainfall during our wettest months and experience 100-degree days for most of the summer. If you're elected to Congress, David, how would you advocate for climate action, given the political realities of gridlock and, especially if Democrats don't retain the House in November?
Yeah, so one of the things I would do is I would make sure that we only implement measures that are going to be good going forward for climate. And I think that that's really important. I do understand inflation is really high right now, and gas prices are one of the things that's greatly affected by that. But Nikki mentioned earlier, and we were talking about ethanol in everyday gas. I think ethanol it will probably not be the answer if we're going to be talking about climate change. I think that ethanol is 24% more carbon into our atmosphere, and it really makes the carbon sequestration a lot harder. And so I think that when we advocate going forward for climate policies, one of the things that we have to do is not always find a way to wiggle our way out of it. You know, climate is one of the most important things that we have to address going forward, because if we don't, we won't have a planet for our kids. And so, you know, we already see water rising really fast year by year. I think that we have to enact legislation like the Emergency Climate Act that Senator Sanders introduced in the Senate. I think that we have to make sure that people understand that, you know, climate isn't something that we can put off and we can keep listening to the oil lobbies and letting them write legislation on. We've got to turn it into an emergency and use the government's power to get things done right now.
Nikki, your thoughts?
Illinois is really leading, actually. We're on a pathway to a clean energy economy, a transition to a clean energy economy by 2050. I really believe that the emphasis I want to put on is transition. I'm very concerned as we're addressing climate change, we're also taking into consideration working people and how those communities that when you see Dynergy, which is a coal-fired power plant closing in Illinois, how those workers are impacted, how those communities are impacted. I'd be fighting to make sure I'm providing support for them in Congress. I also think we need to be making sure that we're looking out for consumers and costs that get passed down as we're making that transition. It's very important.
Okay, David, your rebuttal.
Yeah, so I was in Decatur recently and I was talking to some union members and we were talking about the opportunities of the future with climate, you know, the new green economy and all those things. One of the first things that I would do is make sure that when we talk about organized labor and the new green economy is that we have to make sure that, you know, everybody has equal access to these jobs. And so I think the first thing we have to do is go to, you know, minority communities with Black and brown families and make sure that we, you know, talk about the advantages of joining organized labor so we can have access to these jobs in these, you know, disenfranchised communities. And so that's something that I would legislate for in Congress.
All right, thank you. Doug, you've got the next question.
And it's for Nikki. Rivian is operating an electric vehicle manufacturing facility in Normal. Lion Electric will soon be operating an electric vehicle manufacturing facility in Joliet. Should Congress be taking steps to create incentives to expand the electric vehicle industry?
Yes, I think it's very exciting what's happening here in Illinois. We're creating our own new industry, an EV industry, as you mentioned, in Bloomington and with Lion further up north. I think that presents a lot of opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, TCCI, which is a manufacturing company in Decatur, is looking to be making some of the new EV parts in Decatur, and they're receiving some incentives from the state, but they need more incentives from the federal government. And I, again, think it's critically important that we're finding opportunities to support American manufacturing and American workers. And in order to do that, we need to encourage companies like TCCI to develop the EV technology and hire the workers in Decatur to create economic opportunity so that we are in Central Illinois a part of this EV revolution that's happening. I think that's really exciting, and I think that with a partnership between private and public, we can create real opportunities for workers in Central Illinois.
Okay, David, your thoughts on expanding EVs in Illinois?
Yeah, so I've obviously been pleased with Rivian and Lion coming to this state. I mean, I think that's a huge opportunity to expand our economy here. And one of the beauties of it is that most car manufacturers have already committed to going, you know, to EV vehicles almost exclusively by like 2035, 2040. And so I think that it's good that we're on the forefront now. I just think that we have to make sure that access to these jobs and these opportunities is going to be done in an equitable manner so we can reinvest in these communities.
All right, Nikki, your response.
Yeah, I think it is really important that the jobs that we're creating are created in all communities, that we're lifting up all working people. But I think with these manufacturing jobs, we're creating good $70,000, $80,000 a year positions that create real opportunity for working people in central and southwestern Illinois. So I think, and there are some other exciting things that are happening, like manufacturing academies that are happening with SWIC, partnering with our community colleges to take advantage of some of this EV manufacturing. We could be being a partner at the federal level with schools and with private industry to create opportunity.
All right, thank you. David, this next question is for you. It's about transportation, and we were sent this one in from a viewer. Check out.
Hello, my name is Deborah Liu, and I'm recording from Urbana, Illinois. This question is for both the Republican and Democratic candidates. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration just issued a report showing that deaths from traffic crashes increased by 10% between 2020 and 2021. Over 42,000 individuals died on U.S. roads last year. Here's my question. As my representative in Congress, what will you do to reduce these numbers, protect my safety, and protect the lives of regular citizens just trying to get around?
All right, David.
So I think the thing with automobile accidents is that we've got to make sure that drivers are driving safe. I think that we have a lot of laws in place here in Illinois, and we see a bunch of signs about no texting and driving. I think some of that is going to be, a lot of people drive more because when you work from home, you're able to have a little bit more autonomy in your scheduling, and they're not, at work more. So I think there's more traffic. But I think one of the things that we have to really make sure that we do is, as we're seeing manufacturers go to EV, we need to also talk about safety protocols in cars and really making sure that we're doing everything we can with this increased innovation that we have in this country to make sure that people are safe and to make sure that they can get around safely. And I also think that we have to put an emphasis on mass transit. I think when you do that, you take the amount of individual vehicles on the road, and I think that you start to see a lot less personal accidents there too as well. And so not only will mass transit also be very effective for going forward with our climate problem here, and I know that Illinois is going to be on the forefront of having electric vehicle mass transit. And so I think that we can really start to improve those numbers. And if we can do something to get, a high-speed rail system, I think then we can really start to take down those numbers. And, I can't wait to get to Congress so we can start to advocate for a high-speed rail system from here to Chicago, because it will be such a good thing for the people of Champaign.
All right, Nikki, your response.
I think in order to enforce the laws, one of the important things we need to do is support law enforcement. And I think as a federal partner, I'd want to make sure that I'm providing the support to local governments to make sure that we have law enforcement on the roads to make sure that people are minding the road and that conditions are safe. I think one other thing I want to point out is I've worked in the labor movement, and I very much understand the importance of safe working conditions. When you see, and we're building new roads, we have folks that are working along the side of the roads that are also, their lives are also very much in danger when they're doing road construction. We want to make sure that we're protecting workers and making sure that we have safe working conditions, something I've been fighting for.
Your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we start to transition to, more, effective, energy efficient mass transit, I think we're going to have a much bigger opportunity to increase some of these numbers. I think that there's already a huge need for it because we know what we were just talking about with our climate problems. And so as we start to move forward with that, I just think, statistics are going to show that those will decrease because we're going to have less individual cars on the road.
All right, Hannah.
Take a look at this map. The Democratic-led state legislature created this district that you're running in, which starts in East St. Louis and winds its way through Springfield and Champaign. Gerrymandering is a practice both parties use strategically, but political science research consistently shows that partisan gerrymandering leads to further polarization and less actual governing. Nikki, should Congress take steps to end gerrymandering, given that the U.S. Supreme Court has sidestepped ruling on partisan gerrymandering and in the last 10 years has weakened civil rights era vote protections for gerrymandering that's motivated by protecting minority communities?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would very much support that at the federal level. I think that's an important step forward to stopping gerrymandering, and I think that at the federal level, passing legislation to eliminate that in all states would be a step in the right direction. I do think that some of the ways states have drawn some maps and congressional maps have made some districts extremely partisan, either very Democratic or very Republican, and I think that's contributed to some of the lack of civility that we've seen in Congress. People don't have as much of an an inclination to work together if they're in a district that is safely Democratic or safely Republican. I would argue the 13th district is actually very competitive. It's a district that has a slightly more Democratic lean, but it is still central and southwestern Illinois, which connects a lot of common communities. And I would say the University of Illinois, where we're here, is obviously one land grant, is our land grant university, but you also have Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. You have great community colleges throughout the 13th district. Working people are obviously throughout. We've got great manufacturing. Decatur is the #1, Macon County is the #1 manufacturing county in the entire state. And so I think there are things that actually bind this district and make it not as partisan, but I would say overall federally, I would very much support legislation to stop gerrymandering, because I do think that more competition in districts from Democrats and Republicans might help us come together.
David, your response?
Yeah, I think as congressional candidates, we like a gerrymandered map, right? We know that if you can get out of the primary, you can win. But I think as an average citizen, a gerrymandered map is not a good thing for you. I think it doesn't allow you, to get a true sense of who your community is and who they would elect. And I think it also, it lets a lot of people get away with a lot of bad behavior. I think, when you look at people like the Marjorie Taylor Greens, of the world, she's like in the R35 district. She just has to get as far right as possible. And we know that there's nothing that's going to come of that. And so we have to get rid of this gerrymandering stuff.
Okay, your time is up. And you've got 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
So I live in Springfield, right in the center of this district. It's 90 miles to the furthest eastern part of the district, 90 miles to the furthest west. I spend a lot of time on the road, given the nature of this district. But I will say, like I'd said before, I think there's more that we have in common in this district than we don't. I think it's a common sense district. I think people are looking for someone to go to Congress that, whether Democrat or Republican, and obviously I hope it's a Democrat and I hope that it's me, but that's going to go to Congress to be a part of creating solutions, not be a part of the problem. And that's what I'm committed to doing.
Okay. All right. Next question goes to Doug.
David, this one is for you. What is the biggest threat to American democracy, and what would you do about it?
I think the biggest threat is the far right trying to do what they can to set up on the front end the 2024 election. I think that, making sure that we do things like pass a Voting Rights Act and do things to make sure that we have some kind of federal legislation around that, because I think when you look at what's going on in Pennsylvania with, the Republican gubernatorial candidate there, we see what's going on in places like Florida. We have to know what is trying to be set up by some of these far right people. And I think it's going to be critically important in 2024 that we have, systems in place to combat that, because we saw what happened on January 6th. And it was a free and fair election with everything going fine. And so I think when they have time to kind of game the system, I think we have to watch out for that. And so the Voting Rights Act is going to be key. I think really making sure that when, in these primaries that we elect people who are going to stand up for our rights and make sure that they understand and know what voice their community wants to have, because it's going to be a real battle in 2024 for the soul of our country. And I think that if we're not prepared for it, it could get ugly.
Nikki, your response?
I would say it's the erosion of the middle class. I'm running for Congress because I want to help rebuild the middle class. I think the schism between the haves and the have-nots, the very rich and the very poor, that gulf is too big. I have worked on behalf of firefighters. I'm one of the few congressional candidates you'll probably meet that has been on multiple kill floors in a meat processing facility. I know what it means for people to work hard every day and still struggle to make ends meet. Those are the issues I've been fighting for my entire career and why I want to go to Congress.
Okay, 30 seconds, David.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I'm firmly in the middle class, right? So please fight for me, and I'm going to go there and fight, right? But I just think, if there's not free and fair elections in this country, and I think if, we don't fight the white supremacy that happens and all these kind of things that are trying to be pre-set up that we can see with our own eyes, I think we're going to have a battle for the soul of our nation. And I think, being at odds about tax codes and things like that are going to be a moot point.
Okay. That is it for the questions for the debate. So now we're going to turn it to your closing statements. Each of you have a minute and a half. And we're going to start with you, Nikki. You've got 90 seconds to close out.
Okay, thank you so much for having me tonight, giving me the opportunity to talk about the issues. I'm running for Congress because I want to help rebuild the middle class. I have been working on issues that support working people my entire career, and that's what I want to do when I go to Congress. And that really starts by fighting inflation. As I said earlier, I really applaud what the state of Illinois has done to find some immediate relief for working people at the gas pump and in the grocery stores, but we need to be doing more, and we need to be building more things here in Illinois, in central Illinois, and I think with a federal partner, we can get that accomplished. I think we need to be less reliant on a global supply chain that has put, on a global economy that has put so much pressure on our global supply chain that it's contributing to inflation. When I get to Congress, I'm going to fight to help middle-class families keep more of what they earn. And what I mean by that is lowering the cost of prescription drugs. It's capping the cost of insulin. It's extending the child tax credit, which is really a tax cut for working people that were struggling to make ends meet with children at home, excuse me. Those are the issues that I will be fighting for in Congress. And thank you for this opportunity, and I ask for your support.
Fantastic. All right, David, you as well have 90 seconds for your closing remarks.
Thank you. So I think that we have to make sure that we understand the moment that we're in now. I think that when we look at our community, I think that obviously we want to make sure that we advocate for people who are having a tough time right now. But I think one of the most important things is that we want to have a safe community. And I think when you look throughout the 13th, you know, people are seeing increased levels of gun violence. You know, they're seeing inflation. Things look a little bit rough, and I think we need some hope. I'm always reminded of the speech. I think when President Obama was running, he was trying to convince not the American people, but his inner circle, his family, about, you know, what it would mean if, you know, he was elected, and what it would mean to all the boys and girls who looked like him about what they could go on to accomplish. And I think that right now is a moment where we do need hope in our communities. You know, we look at the educational crisis here, where teachers don't feel supported. You know, schools are understaffed. Our youth development programs are lacking, and we don't have a real functional place for our children to go, and we wonder what's going on. And so I think that we have to make sure that we meet this moment, and we have to decide if we're going to be an active and engaged citizenry, or if we're going to fall by the wayside and, you know, let someone else come in and tell us what to do.
All right. And that is it for the 13th Congressional District Democratic primary debate. We'd like to thank the candidates, Nikki Budzinski and David Palmer. A big thank you to our journalist panel, WAND News reporter Doug Wolf and NPR Illinois reporter Hannah Meisel. Our next debate is 1 week from tonight. That's June 2nd. We're going to feature the 13th Congressional District Republican primary candidates. And don't forget to vote in the primary on June 28th. Early voting is already underway. I'm Tanisha Spain. Good night from Illinois Public Media.